For this review, I'm going to go over a couple books. One I just got finished reading, one I've read a few years ago, but I highly recommend them both. It's one of the science fiction classics, and while many of you are already aware of this is probably aimed at for those who have heard about it, but never gotten around to reading it, and that is Isaac Asimov's famous I, Robot. And I'm going to talk about two of the books here. One is the actual book. The other one is a screenplay, and it's more the screenplay I want to focus on. But in order to understand the screenplay, let's talk about the book. Now, granted, as you can see from this cover, I picked this up not too long after the 2004 film I, Robot came out. I went and watched my father, and while I had a good time seeing it, I got the book, and when I eventually read it, it really missed the point. The movie was just a typical blockbuster of robots taking over. And from what some of the stories about Asimov when he wrote this book, and other stories afterwards, is that he got tired of that old build a robot and it does harm on man. So he wrote these stories to went against that by the famous 3 robotic laws. The first one saying that a robot should never harm a human or through an action allow a human to be harmed. The second one, it has to follow up all orders that is given unless it contradicts the first rule. And the third one, it must protect itself at all costs unless it contradicts the first and second rule. And with that, even with those put in the 2004 movie starring Will Smith, they still made it to where robots took over, and the problem was it violates those 3 laws. And as you read this book, and bear in mind this is an anthology, it's a series of short stories that will involve recurring characters. And what it is that despite the fact that it's not about robots taking over, even with these 3 laws, complications can still occur. And so that's what this whole idea is. You can still come with fascinating stories about this. And the stories I said have recurring characters of it. There's Dr. Landing and there's Donovan and Powell. Dr. Landing is the head of the robots corporation that makes the machines, but a lot of them is told through Susan Calvin, who's a psychologist. Because the robots are built with this positronic brain, and that has these 3 laws embedded into them. And she's the one that usually serves as a voice of why these things happen in most cases. And as you get to the introduction, it focuses on Susan Calvin in her later years and telling the stories of the events that happened. And each one of these is fascinating of events. Like, let me go over here based on remember. There's not that many short stories, and it's a very quick read. Asimov is a wonderful writer. We got Robbie, which is about a little girl who was given a robot to serve as a nursemaid and such. She plays with him, loves it to death, but her mother is very, very worried about the attachment she has to the robot, and so they try to take it away, and she grows to attach, she becomes depressed and everything, and that sort of thing. Another one is a runaround. Another one where this introduces Donovan and Powell, 2 tech guys two tech engineers who go out to certain planets because robots were made illegal at one point on Earth, so they're sent off world to asteroids and other planets, and they're on the planet of Mercury. The power of the station, which protects them against the extreme elements of Mercury, is failing, and the only way they could do it is a pool of selenium, which is too far away and too hostile for a human in a suit to go out there, so they sent a robot to do it. The only problem was, it was going erratic, quoting songs and running in circles back and forth, and they had to figure out what is its malfunction, and they found out it's somewhere within the 3 laws that is malfunctioning at this point. Reason is a very interesting one, where, again, Donovan and Powell are on a space station, and the robots there, one of the robots actually ended up finding religion. It was actually finding reason in itself to where the machine at the satellite they're working on is basically God. Everything outside of the station doesn't exist, and he, Donovan and Powell are trying to reason with it. Says, dude, we created you and all this. No. See, I'm much more superior than you. There's no way an inferior being can create a more advanced one. So it looks like it looks like they're about to be in danger of the 3 laws, but is it? Well, read and find out. Another one, and one of my favorite ones is Liar. where there's a faulty robot that has an ability to read minds, which is an accident, was not part of its original creation, and it kind of brings the question of if its ability to lie will this cause complications, and well, maybe giving too much away, but I'm not giving too much. Let's see. Another one was about the evidence. There's this one guy who's a elected official, a lawyer, and all that, who many people were suspecting was a machine. He's doing things that would follow within the 3 laws of robotics, and ask, is this guy a machine or not, and how can they answer this question without actually delving too much into him, like X-rays or something like that. And then another thing is that you got this series of short stories. The last one is very interesting, The Inevitable Conflict, where it shows these thinking machines, like the robots, built under 3 laws, and how they end up running. How do they run with the world with humans on a larger scale of humanity? Whereas opposed to the 3 laws, it's just to individual humans is by itself. So again, these is a wonderful series of short stories, well read, nicely thought out, and besides for reading current characters, there's no overall story, like no major climax and end. Probably the closest thing is the last story when they talk about machines on humanity as a whole. Now, in the late 70s, iRobot has been optioned for a film for a long time. They keep renewing the contracts of it. And Isaac Asimov was asked to write the screenplay, and he said no. But they got Harlan Ellison to do it, and that's what we're going to focus on here. I just got this about a couple weeks before Harlan Ellison died on June 28th, I believe. So I started reading it not too long after that because I was getting ready to read it anyway, so it's a weird sense of timing. So Harlan Ellison was asked to write the screenplay, and the screenplay does have a central narrative that incorporates 4 or 5 of his about 3 stories, and definitely a 4th one adapted from a couple of the other stories. But it's its own thing, kind of its own alternate universe, involving the same characters, has Dr. Lanning, has Susan Calvin. Susan Calvin's the main focus of this, and has Donovan and Powell who show up here and they tell a story. And the whole premise is that this one reporter named Bretnall, I'm sorry, I may be pronouncing that right, but there's one reporter. He goes to this funeral of the first intergalactic president, Stephen Barely, who is a character you find in the original short stories, although this was changed from him just being elected official on Earth to a multi-world president. It was his funeral, and he's filming, the reporter is filming it, and then he notices within the crowd Susan Calvin, who's been has been in seclusion for 20 years. Well, a lot of rumors go around that Barely and Susan were lovers. So his boss tells him, find her and get some information on her. We need to know this. It's a big story here. Where you go. If you get in trouble, I'll bail you out, that sort of thing. So that's the whole premise of this. This reporter doing his best to find out Susan Calvin's relationship with the late Stephen Barely, the intergalactic president. And in so doing, he finds out through old newsreel of her early life. They adopted the story Robbie, where in the original it was just a little girl who lost a robot. Harlan changed that to where it's Susan Calvin's little girl, and Robbie was the robot she used to have. It also adapts the story Liar, and again a couple other stories. And in the end, it leads to a climax, which if it was, it could be easily made as a movie today. Could not be made as a movie back in the 1970s for mainly 2 reasons. One from Asimov saying that this is the late 70s. Star Wars just came out, but to make a movie like this would probably cost about $30 million to make, and the technology wasn't on par with the imagery that Harlan was bringing about at the time. And if you take a look, as you already know in the slideshows that I've shown in the intro, this has been illustrated by Mark Zug. Wonderfully illustrated and would have made a great movie, but 1970s technology, even with Star Wars out, it would not quite get the same feel. You could do that today, though, if you get the right people behind it. The only suggested change I would see out of this is just the screenplay was set in like the later half of the 20th century. On up let's see, the timeline he gives goes as far back as 1952 and as of 2076. So some of the time years has already gone past. I would just say just move the time scale up, to where it's not so out of date immediately. But other than that, keep the screenplay as it is. It's wonderful. It's a very enjoyable read. And Harlan wrote it. He wrote it with the model of Citizen Kane in mind. It was going to be a very serious science fiction story. Isaac Asimov loved it. Asimov, there's an intro in this by both Harlan Ellison and Asimov. And as I digressed a bit because I said from Asimov, one of the reasons that wasn't going to be made is because of the cost it would have made to produce this as it is. Back in the late 70s would have been astronomical, and he couldn't fault him for not wanting to make it because of that. But probably the main reason, I'm going to say it probably is, Harlan Ellison is a bit of a hothead. And as Leonard Nimoy once put it, is like he understands the writing process in Hollywood. He just doesn't put up with it. And he turns the screenplay in. He waited for the call to producer. And after a long while, he eventually meets up with him. And the producer is something was suspicious. So Harlan asks if he's read it. He says, yes, I've read it. And Harlan asks him, what do you think about this scene? It's like, well, that's pretty good. Or what do you think about this other scene? It's like, well, that's also really good. There's, didn't Harlan pulls fast, tries to bait him and says, what do you think about this scene? Describes it a bit. And the guy says, well, that's also pretty good. The scene, the last one was not in the screenplay. He caught him that he never read it. Told the producer that he has the brain of an artichoke, and long story short, fell out of his hands, and the movie never got made. And this one does not resemble the 2004 movie with Will Smith, but it would have been much more superior. Asimov was saying that while he writes with a more cerebral tone in his stories, Harlan puts the emotion in it. And one of the things Asimov says at the beginning is like it was able to bring about the essence of his stories, especially Susan Calvin, but puts a new depth into her when you read the conclusion. So again, pick up iRobot if you can avoid this cover. Classic, whatever cover it is, just avoid that one. But because this is a constant reminder of what this book is not. Love or hate that 2004 movie, it is not the original stories. It's not about robots taking over the world. Now, I think that, there are some, I haven't read any of the other stories. I do have a couple of books, but it is a good, fascinating idea of robots trying to go the next step of humanity. But it's kind of a weird paradox, I don't want to delve into that, but the way how they produced it in the 2004 movie, how the supposed logic that the supercomputer says about taking over humanity to protect itself, to protect them from themselves, to follow the first law, was a contradiction in trying to enforce it. They couldn't do it very well, because if you try to escalate it to where you try to physically harm a person, violation of the first law. So again, the movie did not do a very good job despite all the elements in it. And according to how much stock you take in Wikipedia, according to the Wikipedia deal on 2004 film I, Robot, it wasn't even supposed to be I, Robot. It was just supposed to be a robot movie, but then later they incorporated the, Isaac Asimov into it. So that's probably one of the reasons why it didn't work. So there you go. This one is probably quoted as probably the best science fiction screenplay that will never be made. And what really is a sad thing about this, Harlan wrote this for hopefully that one day it will be made, and him and Isaac Asimov can sit down in the theater and watch and enjoy it. Well, Harlan was already devastated when in the early 90s Asimov died, so that will never happen. And then just recently now he died, so that vision will never happen. But maybe one of these days someone can take this and make a good proper movie in honor to the both of them. But even if that never happens, it's a good thought, and we still have the screenplay and still have the original stories. So there you go. I, Robot, original story, Harlan Ellison screenplay. Pick them up and enjoy it. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.